Today, many students go to college with numerous questions about their faith, yearning to know if the seed planted in them as a child is both true and practical. Using the miracle on the road to Emmaus as a model, young adult ministers conversed weekly for 3 months with college students about the most pressing questions they had about the Catholic faith. As they journeyed together virtually, something amazing happened. Doubts disappeared, fears faded, and Jesus revealed that He is still alive. Hearts Burning Within Us, the latest book from Patchwork Heart Ministry, is a result of that grace-infused conversation. It is the perfect back-to-school gift for recent high school graduates and current college students. Get your copy for them today at patchworkheart.org or by calling 424-704-3278. That's 424-704-3278. The St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, in partnership with Patchwork Heart Ministry and Fiat Ministry Network, presents a podcast for families in crisis.
Hi, and welcome to a podcast from the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith. And my name is Anne DeSantis, and this podcast is for families in crisis, because that's part of the charism of the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation. If this is the first time that you're listening to our podcast, I would invite you to go to our website and learn more about us, because our website is simply nonnatus.org. And with me, I have the president of the foundation is Mickey Kelly. Both of us are located in the greater Philadelphia area, although this ministry really is national/international, but we do try to do a lot in the Philadelphia area. So if you're listening to this podcast, and we're coming out of this pandemic, obviously, we would love to do more in-person events. So please do find out more about us. And maybe there's a way that we can make outreach to your own church community or to another organization that you're affiliated with. Without further ado, I want to welcome my co-host, Mickey Kelly.
Hi, and great to be here again.
Yeah, great to be here again. This is part 2 of a 4-part series. And the series is on the Cardinal Virtues. And so on today's podcast, we're going to talk about the cardinal virtue of justice. And I just want to tell all of you what those 4 cardinal virtues are. They are prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. So during each of these nights that we're meeting for this podcast, the last Thursday of every month, 8 p.m. on our YouTube channel on Philly Nonnatus, last time around, we talked about prudence. So if you didn't hear that one, be sure to go back and listen to it. And then today we're going to talk about justice. So, Mickey, what are your thoughts on the virtue of justice?
Well, my thing is with justice is I always think of it as I think of it as fair treatment. It's like something I learned from grade school. I mean, and then also it looks like that it also has been misused a lot, especially when we look at with the recent phenomenon, such as, the black, some of the protests where people will chant "No justice, no peace," when of course, sometimes we have to ask ourselves, like, do they honestly know the issue at hand whatsoever? Like, do they actually know, was this person guilty? Was he not guilty? Kind of like a two-edged sword, so to speak. And we also, like, when I think of justice too, I also think of it as, do I want to see this person prosecuted? Do I want to see this person, have, say, custody of children, especially since we're tying this into our podcast here for our, for our foundation, of course, with the parents, like, do the kids get to see the dad as often as they see the mom, or vice versa? Like, those are some of the things that we really have to ask ourselves when we discern the virtue of justice.
Yeah, well said, because when we look at these virtues, the cardinal virtues, that they're very important to us as Catholics. And they're really like I would say, like, that's the ground floor, isn't it, of these virtues, the cardinal virtues. They're very, very, very important to who we are as Catholics. And so thanks for tying it into the foundation, because certainly if you are listening to this podcast and you are a family in crisis or an individual who's going through some kind of a challenge, whether it's something related to divorce or separation, which is part of who we are as a ministry and what we offer, we also make outreach to all kinds of people who are going through some kind of family crisis or family challenge. And so justice is something that all of us have to face and have to pray about, and also have to try to follow. And I thought I would just start out by reading from the Catechism. Catechism is always a great place to find out exactly what the Catholic Church teaches. And it says, regarding the dignity of the human person, and this is article number 1803. This is simply about the virtues. It says that whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is gracious, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. And a virtue is an habitual, firm disposition to do the good. It allows the person not only to perform good acts, but to give the best of himself. The virtuous person tends toward the good with all his sensory and spiritual powers. He pursues the good and chooses it in concrete actions. So before we really get into justice, I wanted to just talk about what is a virtue and how do we live them out, and all of us that are at different ages and stages and vocations in our lives. Like I happen to be a person who, obviously I'm a female. I am also married. I'm over the age of 55. So I'm an older adult, right? Maybe not completely a senior citizen yet, but an older adult who has children that are adults as well. And Mickey's coming to us from his early 30s and in the single vocation right at this moment. So maybe we could also talk about that, Mickey. All of us have to deal with these virtues at different ages and stages. What has that been like for you, even at your own age and stage?
Well, I mean, previously we talked about prudence. So things like, one of the things I like to do is travel. And one of the things I have to do is I have to make sure that make sure I don't, do a splurge or anything, make sure I have like money so I can, for the hotel room, so I don't look at a negative bank account later, that's one of the things. And as we also tie in with for this episode here, we tie in with justice. So some of the things that I have we have to bear in mind with the virtue is, you want to be fair to people. You want to, just fairly and things like that. So things like making the right decision, whether it's you want to go to, say, an event or whatever. Do I honestly want to go to this? And also, because let's face it, the cardinal virtues, one way or another, they do tie in with each other, no matter how you look at it. Because, it's kind of like, I think of them as a foursome in golf. Like they're competing, but of course, one way or another, they want to, they want to complement each other in order for them to win, say, first prize or whatever it is. And what I see with justice is, oh, sure, you also want to be fair, but for parents too, you also want to discern, you have to discern, especially if you have kids, discern like who gets this punishment, who should do the chores and everything like that. And also the parents too, they have to make a just decision on how they carry on the things they do on a daily basis, as well as, do things that would be good for their children as well as their family.
Yeah, good way to look at it, because, we're all coming in at different stages in our lives, but justice is still justice. No matter what, we're all called to it, no matter who we are, whether we're a young kid below the age of 18 or a teenager or a younger person, or we're in our 20s, 30s, 40s, all the way up through the end of our lives, is that these, as you said, these cardinal virtues, they all kind of tie together in some way, shape, or form. So moving on, then I thought I could just read a little bit about what the Catechism says about human virtues, and that's number 1804. And I just want to encourage all of you listening to use the Catechism, go to it and learn from it, because this really is what we believe as Catholics. And you don't need to buy the book itself. You can simply just go to their website, and that is Vatican.va, and just look up the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And it says the human virtues are firm attitudes, stable dispositions, habitual perfections of intellect and will that govern our actions, order our passions, and guide our conduct according to reason and faith. They make possible ease, self-mastery, and joy, leading in a morally good life. The virtuous man is he who freely practices the good. The moral virtues are acquired by human effort. They are the fruit and seed of by morally good acts. They dispose all the powers of the human being for communion with divine love. So if I'm reading this correctly, and I think I am since it's right in front of me here, it says that the moral virtues are acquired by human effort. So I wondered, Mickey, maybe we could discuss this idea that this podcast is for families who are going through some kind of a challenge, a crisis, or an event that really changed their lives and made it more challenging. And so for them, how do you think that people who are going through these tough times to choose the good, which it says again, that moral virtues are acquired by human effort. And when we're going through a challenge, let's face it, it can be hard. But I think with God by our side, following the teachings of the church, trusting God, and through prayer, that we can come through it. What do you think about that, Mickey, in terms of?
Well, and I mean, honestly, Fulton Sheen has said time and time again that it does take 3 to get married. And one of those people that, in order for you to get married is, of course, God. Because you see, God is at the I think of God as the centerpiece you have at a family dinner. It's like in the center of the table. And God is our compass. He is our guide, as you mentioned a moment ago, Anne. Because as long as he's at the center of every decision we make, and whether it's good or bad, he will be with us. He will never abandon us.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up it's Venerable Fulton Sheen, I believe, at this point still. Or is it Servant of God?
Well, he's venerable for sure, but yes. I'm waiting for his canonization, of course.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the guests that I've had on another podcast that I did, his name is Alan Smith. And Alan, that is his ministry, is basically spreading the ministry of Fulton Sheen, Bishop Fulton Sheen. So definitely check out and look up Alan J. Smith, because he's got a great website all about him and a lot of archives of all of his shows and the books and everything. He's also a Catholic author too. So I just want to mention that if somebody's interested in learning more about Fulton J. Sheen. And the Catechism says, in addition, on Article 1805, that 4 virtues, and I know we've discussed this a bit already, play a pivotal role and accordingly are called cardinal. All the others are grouped around them. They are prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. And then it says, if anyone loves righteous labors are virtue, for she teaches temperance and prudence, justice, and courage. These virtues are praised under other names in many passages of Scripture. And I think it's good that the Catechism mentioned that all the others are grouped around them, because they're like at the ground floor, like they're kind of holding up the structure, right? So these cardinal virtues are really ones that we should know, understand, and practice. And so last time we talked about prudence. And moving on, I just want to read about justice, and then let's talk about it. In Article 1807, it says that justice is the moral virtue that consists in the constant and firm will to give their due to God and neighbor. Justice toward God is the quote, the virtue of religion. Justice toward men disposes one to respect the rights of each and to establish in human relationships the harmony that produces equity with regard to persons and to the common good. The just man, often mentioned in sacred scriptures, is distinguished by habitual right thinking and the uprightness of his conduct toward his neighbor. Quote, you shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great, but in righteousness shall you judge your neighbor. Masters, treat your slaves justly and fairly, knowing that you also have a master in heaven. Now that's from Holy Scripture. So what do you think about what I just read? Because it's basically saying that there's justice toward God and justice toward men, but in the end, it's all about the common good.
Well, and you see, the good news does not just apply for, does not, reply from God, but it also applies to us. You see, you look at the history of the Catholic Church, one way or another, we've had many saints, many had to pay the ultimate price, of course, and most of them exercised justice. You look at St. Thomas More, for a lot, he had to still put his faith in action, despite the fact that he was working for Henry VIII. And of course, when he begged Thomas More to have his marriage to one of the Boleyn girls nullified, of course, St. Thomas More said, no, I can't do it. And in turn, Henry VIII pardoned him. But of course, St. Thomas More would go on to say that I died God's servant, not the king's. And he was right. Some of the things that kind of popped out at me, and actually were some quotes actually is, and one of them was from the couple, actually, I'll read. One was from in the book of Exodus. Do not mistreat or oppress a foreigner, for you were foreigners in Egypt. I think it really breaks it down, because we look at Exodus, and that really talks about when Moses led the chosen people out of Egypt into the promised land. And, and let's face it, there are times where like they would probably oppress each other and everything, but then they have to bear in mind, they were once, foreigners at one point. Another quote that kind of jumped out at me is from the prophet Jeremiah. And this is like early in this 22nd chapter. It says, this is what the Lord says, do what is just and right. Rescue from the hand of the oppressor, the one who has been robbed. Do no wrong or violence to the foreigner, the fatherless, or the widow, and do not shed innocent blood in this place. I think this really hits the nail on the head when it also comes to justice, because we do want to rescue those that are oppressed. And that's actually part of the mission of our foundation, of course. Now, I'm not just saying like those that are kidnapped or held for ransom or anything like that, but also those that could be spiritually oppressed from outside, or even socially too, no matter how you look at it. And we also look at the families that don't have a father in the picture, or a one parent household or anything like that. Then this is really where it ties in. We jump in to help them, guide them, be like, hey, we're here for you. We want to help you. And also too, like, we don't want to murder. We don't want to shed blood, but we want to build people up. So like, we don't want to do anything that would dehumanize people. We want to rehumanize them in a sense.
Yeah, well said. I'm glad you brought that up. The whole idea of rehumanizing, not dehumanizing. That's so important. And everything that you said, it's all important stuff, especially in light of who we are as a foundation. And may I say, since we're kind of still at the beginning of this podcast, if you're listening to this and thinking, I would like to learn more, and maybe you might even want to talk to a priest about some of the questions that you have about some of the issues that are happening in your own life related to some of this. And with that said, we offer a free pastoral consultation that you can contact us. So I just want to invite those listening that if you are thinking that you have some issues that they're issues of justice and they have to do with your life and your family, just reach out to me at nonnatus.org, because there's a contact form that goes to me, and I can set up that appointment with one of our Mercedarian friars, and they can answer your questions. Now, I found something else, Mickey, that I thought would be interesting for those listening. An article that I found on Catholic culture on the virtue of justice. It talks about this idea that there's primary and also secondary rights. And of course, in the article, they talk a lot about biblical verses that relate to making sure that people get their, the rights that are due to them as humans. And one of the things that it says here is that all rights are not the same. Some rights are primary and they are founded on the basic needs of human persons. Examples would include right to life and the right to truth. These primary rights belong to every human person from the moment of conception. They cannot arbitrarily be taken away. And then it gets into talking about secondary rights, that they differ from one person to another depending on each one's vocation and responsibility. These would include the rights of parents as distinct from those of their children, the rights of civic leaders as distinct from those of the citizens they serve, the rights of teachers as distinct from those of their pupils. While secondary rights are genuine, they are subject to change as circumstances in the family and society occur. On the other hand, primary rights can never change, nor can they be discarded. I thought that's interesting stuff, because that comes into play when we think about our own occupations too, right? What we do for
it's like, for sure, Anne, because like I think some people think like, oh, justice, that's for like judges, lawyers, and paralegals and everything that. But in reality too, every occupation is under the umbrella of justice. You look at people in the, I like to use as an example, medical professionals, because they have to make the right decision on the medicine you have to take, the surgery you need to have, and the therapy. Like one example is with me, I'm trying to make a full recovery from an upper arm injury, shoulder as well, that happened to me back in the springtime. And one of the things that was happening in all the process, from the time I go to the emergency room, the doctors had to, get their heads together and figure out, hey, you're going to need this done. You're going to have to get, CAT scans, et cetera, et cetera. And then they would recommend me to someone under the orthopedic branch of their hospital. And I was seeing him for a good 4 months. And he would evaluate him from the time I was on the sling to the time I got off the sling. And of course, he also made a decision. Did I need surgery? Which of course I didn't. And of course, it's just a matter of, biology. And let's face it, biology, science does win when it comes to healing, whether it's, torn muscle, if it's a broken bone, a fracture, whatever it is. Because let's face it, the doctors do have to make the most precise decision that would make or break your full recovery. And also another branch, you have to also decide too, like, with as far as your expenses and everything. So, of course, that would be a discussion for another time. But overall, the medical professionals, they do have to make the right decision for the medicine you take, the procedures you need to do, or surgeries, and of course your recovery time, and of course the things you can do during your recovery, such as you can't lift, a certain amount of pounds. And at the same time too, you also have to go through therapy, and that could take anywhere between 3 to 4 months.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that with us, because some of our listeners, they might not be aware that you did go through a very challenging time earlier this year. We're taping this right now in August of 2021. And you had an event in your own life that also challenged you in terms of this whole idea of justice. And so maybe in a little while we can unpack that a little bit more, because I think that when we deal with something personally, it helps us to understand when it comes so close to us, one of these virtues, that we have to exercise it in such a way that we never have before. And I just thought I would read something from another article. Is from vacatholic.org. And this is about how the church defines social justice. It says, how does the church define social justice? It is when society recognizes the human dignity of all, equality of all people with differences and abilities, and solidarity among all humankind. The Catechism, for instance, states clearly that Catholics must care for the poor and work for the common good, citing the equality we share with each other by virtue of our humanity. The Church nonetheless points out the difference in distribution of talents. These differences belong to God's plan, who wills that each receive what he needs from others, and that those endowed with particular talents share the benefits with those whom need them. These differences encourage and often oblige persons to practice generosity, kindness, and sharing of goods. They foster the mutual enrichment of cultures. That's from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, number 1937. Interesting stuff. And with Mickey, I thought if you wouldn't mind sharing, and it's really up to you, but I know that this whole virtue of justice came into your life in a more profound way earlier this year, where you really had to exercise that in your own mind, the meaning of it, and when it came to an injustice that you suffered.
Sure. So I think it's very timely that we have this discussion on the virtue of justice, because back in this early spring, I was on my way to work before the crack of dawn, and I was actually I was nearly robbed and attacked by two teenage boys, African American males under 18 years old. In the process, I was escaping. I fell and injured myself, and of course, of course, I was very dehumanized that day from two complete strangers who were half my age, of course. And when I was going through the mind, the first thing I wanted to do was I wanted to get payback at them. Like I was going to try to hunt them down when I was fully recovered and, seek vigilante justice. However, when I got to my senses, because let's face it, like when something happens to you, your mind goes through a gazillion different places, and it's not really good for you on a mental aspect. But then when things calmed down, and then when the dust somewhat settled, I just thought to myself, I pray that justice comes to them and they learn from their mistakes. And I don't wish ill or anything like that, but I hope they learn from it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, because I know that this was a challenge for you. I'm so sorry that you went through what you did go through, and I'm glad that you're on the mend with healing, not only physically, but also all the other areas, right? Psychologically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, because it's a trauma, isn't it? When people go through something like that. And that's why I'm glad that you brought this up, because justice is something that came face to face with you inside your heart and mind and soul when this happened to you. But like you said, now you're able to kind of look at it in a different light and say, God has a way of bringing healing and justice. Maybe you don't know who these boys were and whatever happened, but somehow, some way we can offer those prayers for you for healing, and that God would bring proper justice to those who are not following in the ways of him and of what is right.
Mm-hmm,
So,
for sure.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing about that. Now, Mickey, with what you went through, and people who are listening who are going through other kinds of crisis, right? Other family things that have happened, could be a spouse that left them. It could be that they got laid off from their job unfairly. It could be something to do with a bad relationship or friendship. Would you have anything or any advice for them? Because they might be dealing with something not exactly like you did, but feeling some of the same things that you went through when you suffered an injustice.
My first thing I would say, being upset, angry, whatever it is normal. I have been through some of those avenues before, whether it's getting laid off or having a friendship broken off, for whatever reason, just know that you're not alone. I will promise you, you will find and meet people that have been through the same ordeal as I have. But just know that something is going to come out of it, something good. When you find out that good, embrace it.
Yeah, amen. Embrace it, because I don't know if you would agree with this, and I think you will, but would you say that healing is a process? It's not something that you snap your fingers, say a few prayers, and you feel better and everything's fine. It is a process that takes some time.
I will say one thing, one of my favorite comic book heroes is Wolverine. And suppose he was in a close quarter combat, so to speak, with someone that pulls a knife and slices, leaves an abrasion around his face. It heals quick. That's one of his abilities. However, for normal human beings like us, healing does take time. Now, you can heal faster physically than you can mentally. And mental, when you experience mental trauma, it does take time. And the best thing you do is, number one, you do talk about it. Number two, you do seek counseling. And three, just don't do anything that will compromise your overall mental health, such as, binge on alcohol or binge eating, whatever the case is. And let's face it, that there are studies that people that do go through mental trauma have binge on alcohol, maybe have an increase in alcohol intake, or have gained weight, so to speak. There are studies out there, believe me. But every now and again, we have to stop and check ourselves. And, we have to find, a group of people that can help us hold us accountable to try to, get that closer to a full mental healing. It's one thing, you can lose, it's one thing to gain weight from all this, but and also too, and of course, Ann and I, we know some people that do things, with mental health. And I honestly think that's something that's very underappreciated in today's society. It's even stigmatized by the media, and it's not right at all. Especially, the mental health advocates. I would guarantee you they would find a blog, to have a blog piece or an article write up or an op-ed too, saying, where did that show go wrong as far as mental health is concerned? And, and let's face it, that the media doesn't give us any justice whatsoever. No pun intended, of course. but let's face it, and of course, one of the things that the foundation was hoping to do is also raise awareness on mental health, because let's face it, there are people that do struggle with it, from a family crisis or a crisis of their own. And we're here for you.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that, because that is the charism of who we are. And just a little education for people who might listen to this for the very, very first time is that we were formed through a religious order, and they are headquartered in Philadelphia. The church is called Our Lady of Lourdes at 63rd and Lancaster Avenue in the West Philadelphia area. And we're also in 4 cities in the United States. When I say we, I'm referring to the religious order, of course, the Mercedarian order. And they're in Cleveland, Ohio, Western New York, and also in St. Petersburg, Florida. But they were founded in Barcelona, Spain in the year 1218, a long time ago, 800 years ago. And so our charism, the 4th vow of the charism, is that willingness to give our lives for those who are in danger of losing their faith. Now, does that mean a physical giving of our lives? Well, back then, 800 years ago, and sometimes even after that, because we've had martyrs in the order, sometimes they do. But mostly for us, people like Mickey and I, Mickey being the president, me being the director of the foundation, is that it's the willingness to give our time, talent, and treasure to help other people in this mission. And the mission is to families who are in crisis and those affected by divorce and separation. It's twofold. And so this virtue of justice, for those of you who are listening who've been through so much, and as Mickey said, that healing takes time. It's not an overnight process. It's not something that you say one short prayer and the next day everything's great. Now, it doesn't mean that that can't happen once in a blue moon, right? But healing is something that takes time. I want to recommend to all of you listening to go to our website on our helpful resources page. It's called Outside Resources. And down like on the middle of the page, we actually have a couple listings of Catholic counselors, good Catholic counselors. So check that out, because, if you need healing and you need to talk to a professional, the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, we're not licensed therapists. None of us are. We do have one that is on our board of directors. And of course, we also recommend her too. Her name is Colleen Bridget Fitzpatrick, and she's located in Haddonfield, New Jersey. She's another person that you could contact. Just go to our website on the About Us page, and you can learn about Colleen. But for the most part, our priest and myself and Mickey, we're not licensed therapists. What we offer is pastoral accompaniment, which is basically a good listening ear, prayers, and then making ourselves available for you when you need us and through the resources that we offer. So Mickey, I just want to thank you for sharing your personal story about what you went through, because it speaks volumes to a lot of people who are listening, who have been through so much themselves and are looking for some consolation. When did you, maybe you can share with us, Mickey, with the situation that you had, was there a point that you received some kind of consolation where you finally felt like, well, maybe I'm not completely healed, but I'm on a better path than I was the day after it happened?
I would have to say it took me about maybe a couple weeks. So probably by the time I got off the sling, I felt like I was somewhat in a better place. I mean, I'll be honest, there were some up and downs here and there, but that's part of life anyway. One of the things that my therapist actually shared with me that I was frequent going is she showed me this diagram. I would think that it's a straight line for success, and that could also apply too for recovery. But in reality, for someone that has to go through the physical therapy, which is me, of course, there's I think of it as making too many turns, you're you're circling around the block, finding a parking spot, so to speak. That's common in the city anyway. So is that, and of course a lot of twists and turns, almost like watching, one of those critically acclaimed thrillers that could be Oscar worthy or whatever. So that's basically how I can really sum it up. And it's and you said a moment ago, and that it's not a snap of a finger. It takes time. And honestly, all it took were, I remember that when I was admitted in the ER, I went on Facebook. You saw yourself that I went on my Facebook page and I asked people, hey, can you please pray for me? And then my post, I would probably say within the first 3 or 4 hours, it blew up tremendously. From people asking hey, what happened? Or I'll be praying for you. I hope you're okay. Things like that. And I was actually looking back at it maybe a couple of weeks after the fact. And of course, it's one thing, my sister saw the big picture, because I gave her permission to give everyone an update. But then when I looked at it, I was just overwhelmed by the people that really cared about me. And I felt like I felt some peace from that, knowing that I had people that cared. All it took was one simple post, and then, I saw a virtual explosion of people pouring in, they lending their support and their prayers.
Yeah, it was good to see on my end as well, because when you care about someone and you see an injustice like that, we all do pray. We pray, but we also want to act too. So I'm glad that your friends came forward. I'm glad that you got support. And I want to make that shout out to people who are listening to this podcast, because when you've suffered some kind of an injustice, one thing that you can do to bring healing, not only to another person, but to yourself too, is by helping somebody. So sometimes even when we're suffering with something, but we lend our hand out to another person who's going through maybe a similar situation, then the healing can be brought to you as well. So never discount the fact that the good deeds that you do in God's name make a difference, not only for them, but also for you too. I thought we could talk a little bit also about dignity and also what the church teaches, again, because there's an article here that I have from vacatholic.org that's called Check Your Catechism. It says, because the Catholic Church defines social justice as actions that recognize the fundamental dignity and worth of every person from conception until natural death, when we engage in the spiritual and corporal works of mercy, we are working for social justice. When we defend the rights of the unborn, the disabled, and the elderly, we're working for social justice. When we defend God's plan for marriage, we are working for social justice. When we advocate for the dignity of work, good jobs, just wages, we are working for social justice. These actions promote the common good and are in and of themselves social justice. As Pope Francis said in Evangelii Gaudium, none of us can think we are exempt from concerns for the poor and for social justice. And another interesting comment, it says in the same article, is that many have sought to affix political labels to Catholic social teaching. But Catholic doctrine is just that. It's Catholic. As members of Christ's Church, we are called to be promoters of social justice by living out our faith in the public square. And the reason I'm bringing that up is that sometimes people in the political camps, we like to divide, right? We like to divide it up and say that social justice is more of on one side of the political realm and not on another. But this article mentions that the pro-life activity, right? Mm-hmm. And anything standing for the elderly, for marriage, and then also for the poor. It's not one or it's like one or the other, right? Isn't it all blended together? Like, can I give you an example to all the people who are listening? Is that Mickey himself and myself too, when I'm able to, is that we pray for the unborn and literally go to facilities and pray in front of these facilities for the unborn and for mothers and families. And I remember one time, Mickey, you and I were walking down the street on the way back, and there was a homeless man on the street. And Mickey walked over to him and asked him, he said, "Hey, buddy, how are you doing? Are you okay? You need anything?" And I think that was a good example, because you exercise justice, not just on one side of the spectrum, the pro-life, what people label as pro-life causes, but also for the homeless. Because doesn't it all go together? Talk a little more about that, how all of it goes together from conception until natural death.
Yeah, I think and you really brought up, I think it was a really good example you did. I almost forgot about it, but thank you for noticing. But one of the things that I think some people really get caught up, and this is the common rhetoric we see from the lamestream media, like to call them, and people that claim that they are pro-life, like they probably want to end the death penalty when they want to dismiss the most vulnerable in our society. And one of the things that, to be pro-life, it's not just like just to be, against abortion, for, the unborn children, but you also want to help them. You want to help feed them. You want to help them find a home and everything. Because let's face it, the majority of the babies that are born, of course, we have a teaching on, premarital sex, but of course, that would be a topic for another time, of course, with our podcast sooner or later. But to stay on topic, some of the things that I have noticed is that people like, and this, I think most of us are at fault here, no matter where we are in the political spectrum, because you have one side that wants to end war. They want to end the capital punishment. Then you have another side here that wants to end abortion. They will also want to end euthanasia. You also have another side here that wants to make sure that the homeless got a home. You also have like the immigrants coming into, pouring in our country. You want to make sure they get an education, they get a home, they get this and that and everything, get a line of work, something 9 to 5, whatever it is. But I think what we are easy to dismiss is it's okay. Like we're like, we're pro-life for one thing, but we forget about everything else. That's not how it is. You see, if we want to defend life, we defend life from the moment of conception until natural death. And some of those things we do is corporal and spiritual. Some of the things are we feed them, we clothe them, we help them find a home, we visit them if they're sick, we bury them when they die, whether we agree or disagree with that person. And then, of course, on the flip side, you get the spiritual side, which is, you pray for the living and dead. Now, let's face it, immigration has been really a hot button issue for the past 2 decades. I know because I had a relative that worked for customs for the government, and he just retired recently. But what the main point is, and of course you touched on this, is that, let's not forget about like those that we see like on the street. They're always begging for food or begging for money. And of course, probably by the time we are this podcast will air, we're probably thinking of looking ahead to the old man winter and the cold months. We want to get those people, make sure they're in shelter or whatever. So that's one of the things we do. We should do as Catholics as well, in the spirit of social justice. But also, too, let's face it. I mean, immigration has been, a bit of like smoke and screen, so to speak, when it comes to this debate. Because sometimes we don't know where these people are coming from. We don't know if they're good or bad. But still, we still have an obligation to help them. And some of the things are, if they want to come to this country for freedom or whatever it is, because they left an oppressed country. And let's face it, I mean, how many of you think are leaving oppressed countries in South America, let alone the Middle East? We need to help them get the resource they need. And even if they have to apply for U.S. citizenship. And also, too, euthanasia. I mean, a year ago, we still had the scandal that involved, some of the states that actually voted for, the pro-abortion challenger in the election last year. They have been exposed for sending in the elderly who had that tested positive for COVID, and they would wind up going to this place and die. And that's not how you care for those people. If you care about life, you would do everything to make sure that they have all the necessities in life: food, water, shelter, clothes, and of course, most importantly, God.
Thank you for sharing on that, because you're right. Everything has to be from conception until natural death. And so it's good that we talk about that, because as Catholic, all of these things are important, right? I mean, it's not just one side or the other. It's got to be from all the way from the time that they're conceived until they die. And I know that as a pro-lifer, sometimes people ask that question, what about after the baby is born? And the answer is and should be, we care and will help provide and have resources too. Maybe you can share, Mickey, because I know you know a lot about that in the Philadelphia area. What happens then? So someone decides not to have an abortion. What are some of those resources? Because I know that, especially in the Philadelphia area, there's some great places that people can go to.
Well, first off, they may be listening to this podcast, and so we have to give a shout out to our friends such as Marlene Downing from Hope Pregnancy Center. That is just next door to a wonderful Baptist church run by the son of an NFL player. We also give a shout out to all the men and women who actually come in with the pregnancy resource centers or crisis centers who have done phenomenal work to make sure that the mom has everything that she has, and I have seen posts and read somewhere that these people go the extra mile, such as throwing baby showers, showering them with love, and also making sure that they have access to a community where there are single moms who are part of like this home where they come together, and at times there'll be volunteers that would come in and show them basic things like cooking and knitting, crotcheting, basic life skills, ways for them to get a job or go back to school, whatever it is. And, kudos to them, because, when the next time someone says, and I would love to see them, make them, I don't want to say use this as a way to explain, but next time you have like these people that come by, be like, oh, you don't care about the babies after they're born, and be like, actually, I'm the epitome of why they still exist today. And I help that mom every step of the way. And I mean, hey, if that embarrasses that person that would try to taunt them, so be it. Because let's face it, I mean, and sadly in our country too, and people are quick to jump to conclusions. And I'll probably end with this point here. But the reality, I think also too, like, people just don't understand, we're some of the people that we see today, that especially the ones that heckle us, and we see this from time to time again, and they're taught how to think, not how they should think, because they need to learn to think for themselves. They need to learn critical thinking skills. They need to learn to challenge their brain, because let's face it, because all they're learning is stupidity, and that needs to change.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, because when we want to become educated about what the truth, because isn't the truth, it really is the most important thing. And as Catholics, we know that the truth is God. It's what Christ teaches. It's the salvation, the Paschal mystery, the life, death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus Christ. And so that's the truth. And so we live in that truth. And that's what the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation is all about. That is what the Catholic Church is all about. And Mickey, I thank you for your work, because that's what you're all about as well, and everything that you do. And thank you from me, and also from the foundation. Now, as we end this podcast, I just want to remind everybody that this podcast has been on justice, and it's a part of a 4-part series that's on our YouTube channel, on Philly Nonnatus on YouTube. You can listen to the first one that we did called Prudence. And next time we meet, we'll be talking about fortitude. And then the last one that we do will be coming soon. And that will be on the virtue of temperance. So let me just end with this, if I could. And this is from the Catechism, from Numbers 1810 to 1811. It says that human virtues are acquired by education, by deliberate acts, and by a perseverance ever renewed in repeated efforts that are purified and elevated by divine grace. With God's help, they forge character and give facility in the practice of the good. The virtuous man is happy to practice them. 1811, it's not easy for a man wounded by sin to maintain moral balance. Christ's gift of salvation offers us the grace necessary to persevere in the pursuit of the virtues. Everyone should always ask for this grace of light and strength, frequent the sacraments, and cooperate with the Holy Spirit, and follow his calls to love what is good and shun evil. So, Mickey, again, I want to thank you for joining us on this 4-part series.
Thank you for having me, Anne.
And we will see all of you next time here on this podcast of the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel at Philly Nonnatus. God bless.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. For more information about the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation, visit nonnatus.org or email director.srnf@gmail.com. Today, many students go to college with numerous questions about their faith, yearning to know if the seed planted in them as a child is both true and practical. Using the miracle on the road to Emmaus as a model, young adult ministers conversed weekly for 3 months with college students about the most pressing questions they had about the Catholic faith. As they journeyed together virtually, something amazing happened. Doubts disappeared, fears faded, and Jesus revealed that He is still alive. Hearts Burning Within Us, the latest book from Patchwork Heart Ministry, is a result of that grace-infused conversation. It is the perfect back-to-school gift for recent high school graduates and current college students. Get your copy for them today at patchworkheart.org or by calling 424-704-3278. That's 424-704-3278.